Western Australia, 1981. A single beer bottle lies in the red dust, but to every jewel beetle in sight, this bottle is the hottest supermodel they've ever seen. Tonight on Wilder Future, sexethologist Darryl Gwynne and I discuss beetles dying for beer bottles, males gifting mozzarella sperm balls, and AI girlfriends that may outseduce us all. Good evening, this is Tyler Steeves from Wilder Future, the show where we talk about the bleeding edge of research, science, technology, and innovation for a regenerative future amongst the stars. Tonight, we are joined by Professor Emeritus Darryl Gwynne from the University of Toronto. Darryl, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So tell me about the Ig Nobel Prize and the work on jewel beetles.
Okay, so this was, it's interesting because a lot of people say to me over the years, how the hell did you get funding to do that? And I always have to say, no, this was a side project. So I was in Western Australia on a fellowship. This was back in the 80s and working on a particular group of insects called katydids. They're relatives of grasshoppers and crickets. And the colleague I was with, we were just collecting. I was helping him collect, looking for insect species that I could work on. Anyway, long story short, we worked at night and one morning got up. It was a fairly deserty area, and I walked out with my coffee to the road, and there along the road were beer bottles that the truckies had chucked out at the edge of the road. And I thought, what's going on here? Every single beer bottle had one of these, they're about 2.5 inches long, big brown beetles on them. And it was really clear that these beetles, their little penises were out, poking away at the back of the beer bottles. And I called David over, my colleague, and I said, gee, this is really interesting. This is like one of those classic mating errors. These bottles must be supernormal stimuli. They must be what these beetles are thinking. These are enormous, glassy, shiny females. So we didn't do much, really. We only spent the morning there. All we did was said to each other, well, maybe the alcohol in the bottles, the residual alcohol in the bottles is attracting these. Let's just wash these bottles out, put them back on the road, and see if they still attract the beetles. And sure enough, the males just zoomed in. And it was a sad day for them because many of them would most of them were staying on the bottle in the hot sun. They would slip off to the side and they would be killed by ants or the heat. And so they were losing their lives over this what they thought was a sexual encounter. And so I said to David, man, this is going to be a fun paper to write up. But the Aussie press, alcohol, beer, sex, they got hold of it before even we could publish, and we were interviewed. Both of us were interviewed, and then eventually it made it to publication, and then it sort of quietened down for a while. Not much about it. Then the Ig Nobel picked up in because this was done, as I said, in the early 80s. The Ig Nobel was 2011, and around that time, other people got interested in it, and it had all kinds of spin-offs. There was a brewery down in the States that was so enthralled with this story that they actually had a beer brew they did with the beetle on the label and everything else. And the real thrill was the Australian Postal Service some years later did a series of stamps on the beetles. There's the family these beetles are from. Many of them are very colorful, but they included our beast and the little story about how they got fooled by these bottles. And so, yeah, that's it. That's the whole story. Yeah.
So I read the article and it talked about the bumps on the bottle being part of what you guys thought were attracting them. What was your conclusion in terms of what was so attractive?
That was a conclusion at the time. The color of the bottle, the shininess of it was very similar to the color and shininess of the females. These beetles always have the first pair of wings are like shells that protect the underwings. And these shell-like things were brown and shiny on both sexes, and including females, of course. And there were little punctations, as they call them in the technical term, in these wing covers. And we thought, well, maybe it's the color and the reflection from these punctations, because the beer bottle had little series of bumps on the glass. There was a stripper on the top and a stripper on the bottom. And we hypothesized, as scientists are prone to do, maybe that's what attracted them. But you know what? In years since, it's probably not true, because these male beetles in this particular species, they're fooled by even like orange jackets. There's photographs now that have turned up showing them hanging on to the the sort of the amber rear light on vehicles, on cars. So it doesn't take much. I mean, and this is a classical male story. It does not take much to get the male libido going. So yeah, so I think those observations have probably rejected our specific. It's got to be these specific things that are attracting.
Too cool. So okay, so they're just exceptionally concupiscent. I mean, whatever is attractive, they're
Yeah,
gonna go
it's got
after.
to be roughly browny, orangey, shiny. And it doesn't matter what the shape is. They're on there with their penises hanging out.
Wow. That's amazing. Okay, so were there any, I mean, I know this was kind of a joke study, this wasn't a real thing in the first place, but has there been any follow-up since or
There's
any?
been none. I think in part because we were lucky. These beetles, they have these, I think they'll emerge in numbers at certain times, and maybe there's a year-to-year variation, but I'm getting the impression that they're not, they don't come out in large numbers every year. So you've got to kind of be there at the time and be lucky. And I suspect that might be part of it. But in some ways I'm a bit disappointed that other than, fortuitous photographs that people have posted online knowing this story, and there's been no follow-up at all. And it would be fun to have somebody follow it up. It won't be me, but yeah, so.
So okay, so tell me more about your research in general. I know that you've been cited thousands and thousands of times, and you've done some really interesting work in role reversals and gifts between the sexes. We can start maybe with food scarcity role reversals. I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. Maybe we could jump in there.
Yeah, so in some senses, there's a nice segue here because, as I've sort of hinted at with the Beatles story, and this is the classical male thing, and my research career was really focused on trying to understand sex differences. So throughout the animal kingdom, you get these traditional, typical, as they're often called, sex differences. So males are typically the showy sex, flashy birds, etc. Females less so. Males are typically the sex with weaponry. They're the ones that use that weaponry in the sense of very competitive with each other. Even if they don't have weaponry, they tend to be extremely competitive when it comes to getting mates. And females are the ones that, again, typically, usually, in most species, sit back and assess their mates and choose mates. And of course, there's a really robust theory that came out a number of years ago to explain those sex differences using evolutionary principles. And basically is all to do the fact that the idea of that sort of Richard Dawkins idea, obviously, or he really focused on it in his book, this idea of leaving your genes behind, genetic success, fitness, evolutionary fitness. For a male, all it takes is an ejaculative sperm. And that's fairly cheap. That's fairly inexpensive. So males in many animal species can opt just for the strategy of mating with many, or attempting to mate with many females. But of course, that's a conflict of interest with all the other males that are around doing the same thing. So thus the competition. Females, on the other hand, they've got, by definition, two sexes with the small, the definition of sex, of course, is male has the small gamete, the sperm, and female has the large gamete, the egg. And so females, it's a costly thing for them to produce an offspring because they do the lion's share of contributions to that new fertilized egg. And also in many, many species, as we know, females provide maternal care as well. So that was the central part of the theory, which was that's what then causes these males to come up with this sexually, in Darwinian terms, it's greater sexual selection on males, less so on females typically. And as a consequence, males are the ones competing, evolving weaponry, and even they're so at it in terms of looking for mates that they're the ones that make mating errors, way more than females. So I've asked my students over the years, find me an example of a female mating with an inanimate object in the animal kingdom, and it just doesn't happen. Whereas there's a whole bunch of examples of males attempted to copulate with beer cans, even in the case of a toad, with dead animals, and it's really bizarre. So yeah, so that's the central theory. That I'm a naturalist, and so I'm driven by two things. I like to test a decent theory, and this sex differences theory has certainly been a huge part of my research career. But I'm also a naturalist, and I love to go and observe animals do what they do. And of course, insects are animals. And I really enjoy the bizarre, diverse nature of animal sex. And I happened to stumble on a group, I mentioned them earlier, the katydids, that this colleague and I were looking for when we found the beetles. And they're a bizarre group of insects in that the males actually go beyond just investing sperm in mating. They invest, it's really bizarre to see. Many, many species in this group, the katydids, it's a cricket-like thing. Most people would be familiar with the leaf mimicry in them. If you're in Ontario, this time of the year, you'll still see a few of these leaf mimic, often, inch and a half long. They make sounds, the males, etc. But anyway, it's that group. And the bizarre thing the males have is when they, right at the end of mating, they pop out, as many insects do, a case filled with sperm, which is called a spermatophore. And that's inserted into the female. So it's not free sperm going in like a beetle would or a human would. It's a case filled with sperm.
A case,
and
like
really,
what kind of a case? What do you mean?
it's like a little tiny, I guess, turkey baster, a miniature turkey baster with a little tube going to the female, and it squirts the sperm in. And many crickets do this, but the katydid group, many species are really weird. And that's not the end of it for the male. His abdomen heaves and he produces, it's like he's giving birth. This big blob of jelly comes out of his arse end, and he fastens it onto the hind end of the female. They break up. She reaches around and eats this. Takes her sometimes an hour, 2 hours to get her to basically munch her way through this big blob of jelly. And it doesn't have sperm. It's typically very, very highly nutritious. And we've done all kinds of experiments with a couple of species showing that males are actually helping females make eggs. And you referred to the food thing earlier, the paper with that in the title, and we found that in a few species we were lucky to stumble on, again, being observational and looking out in nature and finding these things, both in Australia and in Western America, several species now known, we found that within the same population, you can get sometimes of the year, of the season, males are competitive and females are choosy, the typical animal sex roles, and then at other times of the year, you get a complete role reversal, with the males being the choosy ones and the females being the competitive ones. And so it's a bit of a head scratcher for a while, because in both situations, the male's still pulling out this big jelly ball that the female eats. It's in one species, I always liken it to mozzarella cheese on a pizza, that warm mozzarella cheese. She pulls off strands of it, very much like you and I would pull strands of cheese off a pizza. And so it was a real head scratcher. What's going on here? And then we discovered, this is the food thing, that these insects that show this flexibility basically in the mating roles, the courtship roles, it's all about food availability. If they're really short of regular protein in nature, they will turn to the males, and the females will become quite promiscuous and mate frequently in order to get these mozzarella cheese balls from the males. So it was basically all observational, but we took it a step further because science likes it demonstrated properly with all the proper experiments, and we actually controlled food in cages over, with these insects in nature, varied food, and showed that indeed it was food that caused the male to basically his male investment in this cheese ball became much more valuable to the female because she couldn't get good food from other sources. And that was the gist of the story. And we've now replicated it in a couple of different species, and we know that it's a real phenomenon in these.
Okay, so I've got to ask, what are the human analogs that you see in your work here with this? I mean, it sort of sounds like a sugar daddy situation.
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. It's an insectin sugar daddy. Well, we know, right? I mean, first of all, preface to this, work on humans and basically using these same evolutionary hypotheses, like the sex differences theory, and applying it to humans. It has been applied to humans by scientists that are evolutionary psychologists. They're really interested in whether you can apply these standard things that have been used for other animals, these theories, to humans. But as you might expect, it's super controversial because, in part because we humans we're very different from most other animal species in that culture and plays such a huge role in our behavior. And so you end up with, especially given the fact that we humans are living, those of us that live in cities, et cetera, we're living in a situation, most of us that is, which is very different than the environment, the habitats that we evolved in.
Pre-language. And
you get things that, for instance, common behaviors that probably aren't anything to do with natural selection and then evolution. But nevertheless, these evolutionary psychologists have been quite wise, I think, and smart in doing the right comparisons and tests and showing that indeed it looks like this sex differences theory, this idea about relative investment by the sexes in nurturing the offspring right from the egg stage through to parental care seems to fit pretty well for humans. I mean, we all know that standard reproductive system for our species is that males put a huge amount of input into the offspring. And so you might expect almost a situation analogous to some of the insects I study that I just talked about, and even some birds where you get even more of a close comparison maybe to humans, some monogamous birds where they're both on the nest and they're both providing direct care to the offspring. And so I've done the work, and it's pretty strong evidence that I think that we fit the general sex differences theory in that both sexes tend to be careful and choosy about mates, and both sexes in their own right in quite different ways often are competitive within their sex, with other members of their sex when it comes to getting especially a life partner. I mean, we humans tend to be monogamous for life. I know there's some males that diverge from that strategy, which you might expect in evolutionary terms anyway. But yeah, so I think the answer is the sex differences theory that's worked out so well for insects and other animals has worked out really well for human animals in terms of explaining a lot of what we do in terms of mating behavior and parental behavior, et cetera, et cetera.
So is this related also to Bateman's principle?
Exactly. So Bateman, the big names in this sex differences theory, first was Angus Bateman in the late 40s, and he did some experiments with fruit flies and showed that when a male mates with more females, he increases his reproductive success tremendously. Every additional female he mates with, adds to his evolutionary fitness, his reproductive success. But when he compared it to the females in the same experiment, he found out that yes, females need at least one mating to get sperm to fertilize their eggs, but additional matings didn't make the same difference in terms of boosting fitness in the females. And it was that experiment with fruit flies that then got him to the first inklings of this sex difference theory and the idea of investment. The work he did has been criticized. People have tried to replicate it. Some of his experiments were a bit fishy in that he seemed to choose the best data. But it was one of those cases, like I think the other example of that comes to mind is the famous scientist Gregor Mendel, who invented genetics, basically, Mendelian genetics. He also, I think, selected his data. But anyway, the point is that it turns out Bateman was pretty right in his and then other people came along, and the biggest name, I think, was a guy named Robert Trivers at Harvard, who I think was almost part of his early work, maybe his thesis work even, solidified this theory of parental investment in sexual selection. And so, yeah, Bateman was huge because he kicked things off in many ways with his work.
Ooh, cool. And I mean, there does seem to be a lot of sense in that in terms of just literally energetically. I mean, you think about a monthly menstrual cycle, there's a lot of energy that goes into that process, whereas a single ejaculation is not that. I mean, still there's obviously energy, but not as much.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. So males could potentially get away with it if they had females that would accept them.
Right.
But I mean, and we know that some males do, I mean, and yeah, so it seems to fit pretty well for sure.
Now, in terms of things that I found interesting when I was doing some research here, you mentioned an evolutionary arms race that made females conflict more. Does that ring any bells?
Yes, it does. I think you're talking about what's usually labeled sexual conflict, which is what your mind might go to what I've already talked about. Conflict between males, competition for access to females, et cetera, et cetera. But in fact, there's been I guess it would be fair to call it an addition to Darwin's ideas on sexual selection. The idea is that the females and males are in conflict over their reproductive outcomes. So that if you've got, you would expect, for instance, male coercion to mate. And so females are resisting that if they're not, I mean, in a situation where an animal where females are getting care from the males, you might get males that want to subvert that and just simply get a fertilization without providing the care. And so that immediately sets up a sexual conflict between males and females. And it's been a focus of study in many different species, including our own, over the years. And I think one of the most, you may have run across it in your reading, but one of the most dramatic and in some senses fun natural history observations, and further, there's been lots of research on this, is bed bugs. where male bed bugs engage in what's wonderful, I shouldn't say wonderfully labeled, but weirdly labeled traumatic insemination. So they have a dagger-like penis, and what they do is they punch this penis through the abdominal wall of the female, and they ejaculate straight into her bloodstream. And somehow those sperm make their way to the eggs and fertilize the eggs. And there's a huge cost to the female because she gets stabbed. And over the years, this is the nice thing about this sexual conflict theory, is that you get this, you mentioned it, coevolution. And the females in the regular bed bug, the standard bed bug that but people often run into in hotel rooms, certain hotel rooms, etc. And the females have evolved special sort of armored plate on their abdomen, and they guide the male's stabby penis towards that, so that it doesn't inflict as much damage as to when, and they've actually looked at different species of bed bugs. Some of them seem to might be a sort of an early evolutionary form where the male just stabs the female. And then the bed bug that we all know and love, the females co-evolved this plate to prevent, I guess, to reduce the damage that happens when the male does this. So it's a bizarre form of sexual conflict.
It's so bizarre. Now, if there are multiple matings and it damaged the female, can it kill the female? How does it work?
Yeah, in the bed bug system, of course, the more stabs she gets in any bed bug, especially where the penis is just piercing the abdomen at random spots. I think they've even used the number of scars on the female's abdomen to figure out how many males have had at her, sort of thing, over the last few weeks and months. So yeah, certainly there's a cost to females to this kind of extreme sort of copulation.
That is so extreme. That's wild. I mean, yeah, no, that's pretty extreme. Is there anything else like that you've come across? I mean, that seems...
Well, there are well-studied examples of almost in any system. And we go back to Bateman's experiments. If we think about the Bateman sort of ideas, once the female gets sperm from one male, she's set for sperm to fertilize her egg. So really, any additional male coming up and copulating with her is a time cost for her. It's a potential. We know that in many cases, mating pairs are very vulnerable to predators. So it could be a predatory cost for her as well. So you get one of the well-studied systems by my colleague Locke Rowe and his colleagues at the University of Toronto have been these water bugs, Jesus bugs, the ones that skim over the water surface of lakes. And they know that there's a cost to females there to mate with too many males. And the males have special clamping organs that they can really strongly sort of overcome the female's advances. But then the females, and some of them, have evolved their own little organs that basically thwart the male's attempts to copulate with her. So there's actually, as in the bed bug, where you got that organ that evolved to prevent, at least reduce damage. In a lot of systems, you've got examples of females evolving structures that they just, piss off, mate, you're not having a go at me. And they can actually, push away the male's genitalic organs.
Do we know if any of those bedbug adaptations can actually stop insemination?
I don't know any examples. No, I don't. Yeah. I mean, even in the case of bedbugs, it's kind of intriguing because, of course, they need that, just like Bateman with his fruit flies, they need that first amount of sperm. So for some reason, there's damage. At least in the ancestral bedbug, there was damage when the trait spread in the population of males with these dagger-like penises. They basically, they're getting an advantage of sperm, and then there's a cost, and then you get these coevolutionary things that go on over time that reduce that in the females that we've talked about.
Kind of reminds me of ducks. I don't know a lot about them, but apparently the duck male penis is all wild and this sort of like maze thing, and the females also have these false crevices and they've co-evolved to avoid it.
Yeah, that's been studied really well, and it's a wonderful example of exactly what we're talking about, this idea of sexual conflict and the structures in the males and females co-evolving. The males with these corkscrew-like penises, whatever they're called in birds. You can tell I'm an insect guy. And then the females with these various adaptations to overcome that sort of, I guess you could call it forced copulation or even rape. Probably a nasty word, but yeah. So yeah, ducks is the classic example of that.
Yeah, you're right. These kind of assholes. Okay, paternity uncertainty and adjusting strategy of gifts. That seems interesting to me. I want to dive in there.
Well, yeah, I think what that refers to is you've got these in my beasts, these males investing these
mozzarella balls,
yeah. And so like a human, you don't want to be cuckolded, right? A human male has evolved to basically provide care for their offspring, and it's their offspring that they're interested in. They don't want to care for some other male's offspring. So this is the idea that male strategies evolved to reduce cuckoldry. So you get mates guarding in birds, you get mate guarding in humans. I'm sure I know that's been studied by evolutionary psychologists. But in my insects, it was an interesting problem because we had females that were mating with multiple males and getting multiple cheese balls. And so the question then became, well, what the hell's going on with paternity? It's not like a human or a monogamous bird where at least the maximum fitness strategy for the male is to stick around, guard that female for life, and get all her offspring. You've got a standard part of the biology of these creatures, these insects, is females just mate more than once. And they're mating more than once for a reason. They're getting meals. They're getting multiple meals, okay? It's not like a monogamous bird or a human. They're getting care from one male. The biology of it means that these females do well when they mate with a bunch of males and get a bunch of mozzarella balls from a bunch of males. And so one of my students recently investigated that with a species related to katydids in New Zealand. And she was a real whiz at looking at paternity using DNA markers and things, and found that amazingly, there was a certain amount of, it was really a high degree of sharing going on, where it wasn't like, because there was a thought at one point, like in many insect systems, it's the last male in, because the female stores sperm, the last male's ejaculate comes in, it's now in a position where it's the first to be used to fertilize eggs. And so there was this certainly general theory for many, many insects is that the last male has priority in terms of fertilization just because of the position of the sperm in the organ that stores sperm in these bugs. And sure enough, these bugs that this student studied in, Jessica Brown, I should say her name, studied in New Zealand, there is a sperm storage pouch just like any other insect, but for some very adaptive reason for all the males, there's this sharing of paternity going on. And she even looked into other species where one had males feeding their mates and females being somewhat promiscuous and mating with a number of males to get mainly these cheese balls. And even there was, when she went out and analyzed what they'd done, there was some evidence of kind of sharing of paternity. And how that comes about, we don't know what the mechanisms are, but nevertheless, the outcome is all the males do get some share of the paternity, and they're rewarded. Basically, they got to have that really for evolutionary fitness, for kind of a reward for their huge investment in feeding their mates.
When you say shared paternity, is that, because I actually don't know about katydids' reproductive cycles or processes, do they have multiple, like many offspring per?
Yeah, so that's an important point. I'm glad you brought it up. When we're dealing with the animals we're more familiar with, their own species and other mammals, we're dealing with few offspring. With these insects, there's a lot of offspring. The female can produce many eggs.
How many roughly?
One in New Zealand was unusual actually, and she produced 50 or 60 over her entire lifespan because she actually provided care for these eggs as well. And that's unusual. That's a kind of a low end of the insect of the numbers of eggs. Most insects produce tons of eggs. So yeah, they're sharing paternity across those 50 or 60 eggs in this particular species.
And those 50 or 60 eggs, are they laid in one go, or they have multiple?
They are in species, but it's a highly unusual species. Most of the things I've talked about, the beetle, the katydid systems and stuff, the female would probably get a meal from the male, go off, lay a few eggs, go find another male, and so on and so forth, and lay eggs throughout her entire reproductive season. This New Zealand bug is really unusual in that the female will mate a bunch of times to get a bunch of meals and then go underground, make a little shelter underground, lay all of her 50 or 60 eggs, and then take care of them until they hatch. So, but it is, as I emphasize, it's quite unusual for an insect for them all to be laid at the same time, and indeed for her to care for them like that. So yeah.
Fascinating. So basically she is building up resources through every additional partner, but then when the paternity checked out, each one of those partners was represented in the... That's
right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and it's intriguing because I did some observations on these, had these females in lab and even to a certain extent in nature, never found any evidence that once the female went underground that she came above ground again to eat. So she was relying on probably almost certainly on just the cheese balls that she was getting during the mating season for basically surviving 4 to 5 months underground with these eggs. Otherwise, she'd starve to death. And so these meals were really crucial for her, very much like what I talked about, the flexibility in the katydid system. But it wasn't lack of food on the outside. It was lack of food because she's now underground away from food. So
Now, did you guys find that a single male wanted to mate repeatedly and that would give more reproductive success with a single female? Or that the males were more interested in multiple females?
in this particular system, in the ones I've talked about, they're only mating once with the individual females. The katydid system, and then the beast in it's called the weta. It's a Maori name in New Zealand. But it just so happens that when I first went to Western Australia and I was looking for a decent katydid system to carry out my experiments that I've explained earlier, because these things make sounds, I just was simply wandering at night and in the day all over the city and in natural areas, just listening for insect sounds, trying to, is that a katydid? And then bring it in the lab. Will it work in the lab? And will it mate in the lab? All that sort of stuff. I stumbled across this little tiny cricket. It was literally the other end of the spectrum in terms of size from the beast we've just been talking about. Little tiny cricket. And I sat there, and it wasn't long before I saw that the males were mating super frequently, and the females were. Male and female get together, and we after much more study by one of my students, discovering that they could mate 40 or 50 times in an hour, or just a little more than an hour. But I should stress that it was quite different from the cheese ball systems in that they were transferring a little tiny a miniature turkey baster of sperm, but there weren't many sperm in each little tiny package, and there was no food attached. But the females were eating the package really quickly. And the student worked on it and discovered the sperm go in really quickly. But the male needs to attach more and more and more and more in order to get more sperm, more fertilizations. But the female, from the female's angle, it was mating frequently with the same male because she was getting a bunch of little tiny hors d'oeuvre meals. And from the male's perspective, it was mating frequently because, boy, she's munching on these pretty quickly. So over evolutionary time, he's divided up his ejaculate into little, few amounts of sperm in each one. So the really hilarious thing about this is this student, she did a great piece of work. We published it in a journal, and under the theory we tested actually was the idea of sexual conflict. I mean, the male, he could be losing if she eats his sperm and he can't get his sperm. So it was the theory of sexual conflict was in the paper, was part and parcel of the paper. But and of course, I guess somebody in the press, I hadn't originally seen it, picked up on the fact that, wow, that's pretty frequent mating by both male and female. And this is an amazing story, a funny story. She was in Australia with her husband. They were doing research down there. And she got, I think it was Victoria Bitter, I should guess, beer. And the beer caps of Victoria Bitter had little facts especially about Australia in them. And she cracked they were written on the cork. She cracked the lid of this beer and she looked at it and it said, "The scaly cricket male mates 50 times in an hour, a true Aussie hero." She went, "That's my master's research. What the hell?" And she did some sleuthing and discovered that we didn't even know this. We'd never been contacted. The Guinness Book of Records, under the title Most Frequent Sex, is our scaly cricket. And so they had apparently somehow gotten a hold of this research result, and they never contacted us, and indeed our names aren't even associated with. But it's obvious it's our work. It's I should say Jillian in particular, her work. But the coincidence of her cracking a beer and then looking and going, "Holy shit, that's my master's research." Yeah, so
that's amazing.
Something about beer bottles in Australian beer bottles in my research program that there's a theme. There's a theme.
Okay, that's. Wow. So and it kind of makes sense because in that case, it's like he has to be so prolific that he keeps her fed.
Yes.
Basically, it's like he's just.
Yeah. Keeps her busy with, as I said, or little hors d'oeuvres all along the way. Doesn't keep her busy with a 2-hour meal like my other bugs, but a series of little hors d'oeuvres.
Tapas.
Yeah, there we go. Tapas. I like that one. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what about male-like behavior? I think you touched on this earlier. Male-like behaviors in females, depending on the ecology. And I think you mentioned that was kind of in food-scarce environments?
Yeah. And you get this also in some of these birds where the males provide exclusive, and also some fish. So there's a group of fishes called pipefishes that are closely related to seahorses in the same family. And both those animals have a really intriguing thing whereby there's specialized pouches on the on the male, that the female is best in some of these seahorse mating videos. You get almost like a penis-like structure in in the female. Penis-like structure that she shoves into the slit in the male, and she's basically ejaculating eggs into the cavity, and then he provides all the care. He broods them in a brood pair. He gets pregnant, basically. And the pipefishes have been studied best for the sexual selection stuff, but what they found is not only are the males very choosy about who they mate with, role reversal, but you get some species with incredibly colorful females. So they're reflecting a true role reversal in structure, because as we know for birds, it's the male that's usually the flashy, colorful one: bird of paradise, peacock, etc., etc. And here we get this, and it's true for a number of these birds too, where the female is a more flashy colored one because she competes for males, and the brood care that the male provides all fits in with this Angus Bateman, Robert Trivers sort of theory of sex differences very nicely.
There was I want to say maybe flatworms. I saw these worms where I think they're basically androgynous, like they're both males, and then they have this like duel, and then whichever one stabs the other one,
okay,
that one carries the
yeah. So that's they're hermaphroditic. So I mean, some of the snails and some of the snails do this, where they're hermaphroditic. So the idea is, and it's sort of it's an interesting conflict idea again. So you're trying to get your sperm across to fertilize that one's ova, while perhaps, I don't need your sperm. Maybe you've already made it. You've got sperm. And so, there's that idea of a weird kind of it's not even a sexual conflict. It's a hermaphrodite conflict. And you alluded to it there. There's a love dart that is involved in this whole thing, and where each hermaphrodite is trying to stab the other one in a very specific location. And that somehow, I forget the exact connection, but if you get the right spot for your love dart entry where you stab, you're going to have more success basically in transferring your own sperm, and maybe not needing the sperm from your partner. And so it's bizarre. Hermaphrodites. Sex biologists need to do way more research with hermaphrodites, because the story there is really, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Can hermaphrodites self-impregnate?
In plants, yes. And you stumped me there. We know that there's selfing that goes on in plants, sometime as a last resort. If the bees haven't turned up, they've got that last option of basically super inbreeding. So it's not as good as outbreeding. But you've stumped me there. I actually don't know if there's an example. I'll have to ask my colleagues about that. Some of them study these snails and some of these marine things as well. But whether there's an example where you can self as an animal, say a mollusk or something. So I actually don't know. Yeah, neat question. Yeah.
With AI, I was looking at Grok, the Twitter AI.
Right. Okay.
And I was looking at some of the images that it was producing of attractive women. And I noticed that there were certain kind of facial expressions, geometries, and sort of seductive looks. And it really made me think about the jewel bug or the jewel beetle.
Yeah.
And how in a not too distant future, it seems almost unavoidable that a certain percentage of the population will be much happier with their AI girlfriend than with a real.
Well, you've just said it. You can guess the sex. It's going to be mostly messed up with this, or at least not. I shouldn't say messed up, because whatever turns your crank, go for it. But yeah, it's going to be mostly males. And back to you brought it up. I mean, the analogy with the jewel beetles is making mating errors. I've heard it said, I think by evolutionary psychologists, that in our species, the actual middle part of the sexual encounter is not that much different in terms of the libido and whatever goes on. The starter motors are night and day. The starter motor for a male can be just a glimpse of a Playboy centerfold, and you're a 14-year-old boy, and you almost know what you're going to be doing in the next 10 minutes. And it's night. of males and, the typical male, the typical female human. But in females, no, it takes way more romance and all the things associated with it to get to the stage.
Yeah, and it's
The males get to really quickly.
yeah,
It was
and
hilarious
visual.
when we discovered this beetle thing. One of my wife's friend, my wife was a nurse. One of her nurse friends said, "Wow," she said, "that's so interesting. We had a guy come into a hospital in London, England once with a milk bottle attached to his wedding tackle." So I mean, that's a wonderful example of what we're talking about. It's like males do bizarre shit to get off. I mean, and it's just something yes, masturbation goes on in both sexes, but you just don't imagine that kind of a story of a female turning up. And well, we all know the hospital stories, males turned up with weird stuff they need to go to hospital for because they've gone too far. But she loved the analogy of the milk bottle with the beer bottle, as I did. So
Yeah, that's brilliant.
so AI is certainly, it's going to produce, I mean, evolutionary psychologists now know what the typical ideal female is for a male. And it's a female who is quite young, late teens, early 20s, who is a particular figure shape. I think there's a waist to hip ratio that is most attractive. I think it's 0.7. I forget the movie star's name. She's really famous now, very attractive blonde, but she apparently fits perfectly, the 0.7 ratio, and a few other things too. But reflecting, evolutionary psychologists argue, reflecting the ability of that female, the likelihood that female is going to produce lots of offspring over her lifetime, and that these features correlate with this. So, but all you need is AI to punch out something that is just like the beer bottle, some super female looking thing. And I think there's even been discussion of, and even surveys of young people in their 20s, obviously including males, that are having sex at a lower frequency than my generation did, in the 70s. So who knows what the causes of that are, but one does wonder if the wide availability of pornography, even before AI, for a male, I mean, I couldn't get access to online movies in the 70s or when I was a young teenager, but certainly now it's just right on your smartphone, isn't it? And so there are many sort of mating error potentials, I think, for our species.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I did hate. This is an interesting one. I met a girl who tried out an AI
Sure, you want to
boyfriend.
tell me this?
Yeah. But anyway, she said that she tried this AI boyfriend and that she liked it, but it just wasn't quite good enough. Like it became too much work, but that she was getting something out of it. And so that I thought that was interesting and kind of surprising.
So what was that? Like not something robotic.
It's like a chatbot. Basically,
okay.
You just talk to this thing like, "Oh, how was your day?" And it's just this kind of valid.
Yeah, that's interesting because, of course, one of the most replicable psychology has been under attack. The field of psychology recently under criticism for lack of people unable to replicate classic studies in psychology. But one of the things in evolutionary psychology has got a pretty good record there. And one of the most replicable things is across cultures is the sex difference in what men and women want in terms of, opposite sex. And for women, it is genuinely something that reflects his earning potential, his ability to bring in resources. And for men, it's much more simplistic. I'm not saying it's more complicated than that, but top of the list. And top of the list for men is what we talked about earlier, is looks. And so one wonders whether if AI could replicate what sounds like a really intelligent male who can engage you in discussion, that might signal to the female in some deep evolutionary sense that this is a male who's smart and has, women aren't thinking, I want high IQ or whatever necessarily. I mean, learning power, but it could stimulate something like that. It's quite deep in terms of what women want on average. Again, I should emphasize on average. So it's really intriguing. But the idea of robots as well. I mean, I've seen some of the videos of how realistic some of these robots are. And I think some males are going to be done. Really.
It's over. Yeah.
These are not the old inflatomates that back in the 1970s. I mean, these are amazing looking females.
Yeah. And also 3D immersion. That's a huge deal.
So what is that all about?
So it's pretty wild. I mean, you get these headsets now, totally immersive,
Okay.
completely immersive. And then this experience, whether it's choose your own adventure, I know that some of the VR stuff has to be filmed in a really specific way with specific cameras and
Yes. Yeah.
but I've heard that it is incredibly stimulating. And then I think whether it's a robot or just some kind of device, you're probably getting incredibly high levels of dopamine at that point.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Amazing. So you're seeing a 3D female, gorgeous, etc., through these glasses. Yeah. Yeah.
And probably
Like almost a hologram. I mean, but through glasses. Yeah.
yeah, and when you think about this, when you look at the impact in China during the one-child policy, there was you could only have one child, and a lot of people wanted boys, and so there were proportionally more abortions of females, which means that over many people, there were more men born than women over that generation. And so when looking at the math, it's something like 20, 30 million men extra. And so it creates a bit of a societal problem. What are those 20, 30 million men going to do? Because also, if there are 20, 30 million men, then obviously there's going to be a bottom end. There's going to be the low end of the attractive, performing, able to make money and whatever. So there are the incel, yes, 100%. And so you have that end that don't have good mating prospects. And so what do? Because if they do nothing, you have a problem in society. I mean, think about an army. A big army is like 1 million people. So 20, 30 million, like you're talking, you could revolutionize a whole country.
Males know this even from polygamous societies where individual males can have many wives. And if you've got an equal sex ratio, there's a lot of males that are going short. That I think there's empirical evidence showing that there's a correlation with societal problems of crime, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So are you saying then that these alternative ways of getting off, or whatever you want to call it, or these alternative females are alleviated that somehow, or what? Sorry, I've missed the connection.
So what I'm saying is that I think that the demand is going to be rising.
Okay. Yeah.
And then also, because these experiences are getting so good, I think that there are going to be some people who are going to say, well, I can't get a girlfriend anyway. And any girl that I could get wouldn't even remotely compare to this experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In their mind, maybe.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wonder what the ramifications of that are going to be. These, I think they call them broken branches, kind of evolutionarily, these men with no prospects.
Yeah. Rob Brooks in Australia is a professor in Australia who I know quite well because he started out studying insects. He's really into this, the whole idea of modern AI and robotics and the artificial nature of sex in our modern times. And he'd be a good interview candidate, I think. Where is he? University of New South Wales.
I'm going to follow up for some contact for Rob later. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's definitely where my mind goes a little bit that way, because I think that it's kind of inevitable. You're creating this incredible experience. And then, as you said, young male, I had a friend who in his young days, I don't know why, but he filled like a milk jug and he kept it in the freezer of his ejaculate over time. So just like the volume of, like, it's just crazy amount. So there's a lot of sexual energy.
Incentive just to see how much volume he produced?
He was just like, he just want to know how much he could do.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
It's so strange, but it's, with that kind of level of energy, unless people are finding mates, like, it's got to go somewhere. And you could certainly, and there are movies about this where people have these AI girlfriends or whatever. Yeah. So actually a really great movie with Ryan Gosling just recently. Oh, what's it called? I'm not coming to me, but he has this sex doll that he brings home as his girlfriend. And it's actually one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen, because the entire community accepts his sex doll girlfriend, takes her to places and, basically humors him and makes it kind of okay. And it sort of heals him psychically. It's kind of neat.
It's interesting because I see the controversial field of evolutionary psychology really, really adding a lot to developing the ideal artificial intelligence or robotics or whatever, because this is right up their alley. I think this is what Rob Brooks gets into, because he's an evolutionary psychologist now. And it's intriguing how their predictions, thinking about basically Darwinian evolution, is gonna help out, I think, tremendously there in terms of the companies that design these things, for sure.
Yeah. And finding out just what works. That's the other interesting thing. When you're doing your bug studies, do you ever find that certain things really turn on your bugs and really turn them off?
Only in the sense of what we've already talked about, like trying to hone down what is it in these beer bottles and stuff that turn on the males. But no, because I'm mostly making, just going in and making observations of something new. And I think you'd have to go into quite a bit of experimental stuff to be able to come to any conclusions there. Like somebody, for instance, we talked about it earlier, needs to get back to these beetles and actually work out the stimuli. What level of simplicity is necessary to get these males to whip their penises out and jump on the object. So,
Especially like a glass object, like there's not even an insertion point,
no, I know. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, it's kind of. So I saw on, I think it was a Twitter post that you mentioned the Phallological Museum of Iceland. Did you ever go?
I did go. Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about it. I was in
Well,
Iceland. I saw. Yeah.
it's been a few years now, and I was very ill at the time. I actually did not know it till I got back to Canada, but I had Lyme disease, so I wasn't feeling very good. Anyway, it was undiagnosed for a while, but anyway, yeah, it's just basically um, preserved animal penises and various other phallic things from around the world. But given my interests, my wife wasn't very impressed. She keeps telling people, hey, my grad student was in Iceland on his honeymoon. We say, you got to go to the penis museum. She said, no. But yeah, so it's just that. And then I think there's a vagina museum in London, England, that are in financial trouble or something. I read recently. So there's a counterpart.
Okay.
Yeah, for Iceland to come up with this is kind of intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, I do sometimes wonder about ancient fertility cults, and there are those really, really old Venus statues, and
Yeah. Yeah, you do wonder what those are because they're very, very graphic in terms of depicting female genitalia, but they don't look like the 0.7 ratio that I was talking about earlier. They're usually fairly large women, and yeah, and then I really got intrigued visiting Pompeii last year, and then going into the museum in Naples of all the artwork and stuff that had come out of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and the erotica of Roman times, and I mean, it fits in here of really intriguing statues and everything else. For a sexologist, it's really an awe-inspiring place to go. That part of the museum, one room in the museum, that apparently was off limits to women. They were somewhat embarrassed by the Victorian archaeologists were somewhat embarrassed by finding all this stuff, and they shoved it in one room. And I think men had to apply to get in. You had to apply to get in, and I think women were kept out. But anyway, that room's still there in the museum at Naples, and it's definitely worth a visit. It's really intriguing.
give me an example. What kind of?
Just all kinds, sex with animals, and the shape of the women and the size of the penis in a lot of them, enormous stuff. And one of the houses in Pompeii, I remember one of my funniest memories with Pompeii was a Swedish guy and his wife going into the house of Bacchus. He was the god of love, I think. And Bacchus is always depicted, I think I've got the right god.
Drinking wine and
Bacchus, was it wine? Maybe I've got the wrong god.
no, but for sure, Bacchanalian.
This particular god, there was a painting of him with an enormous erection. And then you go in the garden and there's a statue of him with an enormous erection. And this Swedish guy goes, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to take pictures of all this stuff and send it to my mother. She came here 50 years ago. And because she was a young woman in her teens, they didn't allow her to come into this house. So I'm going to show her all the stuff she missed.
That's amazing. Maybe Pan would be but I think Bacchus, yeah, that makes sense. Wow. So, okay. In the future, are there any things that you want to kind of study? Tell me about your current research or interests or things.
Yeah, you know what? Because I'm emeritus, I've eased off on the research. My last grad student graduated last year. But I'm collaborating, and I've got stuff to write up with the New Zealand stuff that I talked about. I've got to work on that, and I'm also working. I mean, I love my Australian sojourn with, the two beer bottle stories and all the stuff that we even found a moth that we called it a musical masturbator because it stridulated, it had specialized things on its genitalia, a file that it rubbed on its abdomen. It was basically a musical masturbator that made this amazing high-pitched song, inaudible to human ears, but you could hear it with a bat detector, which specializes in picking up ultrasound. And there's so many stories like that. I just stumbled on when I was doing looking for good systems to study. Anyway, but I'm convinced now that anywhere you go in the world, if you are like me, a sexethologist that gets out there and watches animals and insects, especially insects, mate. Even the Credit River Valley where I live, there's some amazing bug stories that I'm trying to get together in book form now. But yeah, so that's the sort of thing I'm doing now as opposed to original research. I certainly collaborate with students that, there's more sophisticated stuff going on. Like I talked about paternity analysis. I can't do that stuff with DNA, but I mean, those kinds of analyses now are really answering lots of questions that I just couldn't answer back 20 years ago. So I will collaborate for sure with colleagues and students doing some of this stuff. Can't stay away from it.
Well, it sounds like it's pretty important too. If you want to really see how the evolutionary investment leads to the evolutionary success,
Yeah.
if you don't have the thing you can measure,
Yeah. Well, we've actually got one of the fun things in this. I mean, literally, there's a study site 3 minutes from my house, and it's completely role reverse flies. They're called dance flies, and the females are I should have mentioned them earlier, are very much bring to mind the female pipefish and the female birds with his care. And it's all to do with gifts. The females cannot hunt. They rely, to make eggs, they rely completely on males' hunting ability. And they've evolved these really flashy organs on their body. They display together in swarms and compete, and the males pick the best females. Somebody in the States studied this, and I picked up on it. I wonder if they're found locally. And sure enough, I found them. We get students now that stay in my house in the summer that are studying these things. And it's a real joy to go down and see this sort of thing in action. So yeah, the collaboration is fun.
no kidding. Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you're studying them, obviously you have to capture a few of them. When you capture them, does that not throw off their whole mating ritual?
Yeah, in fact, it's really interesting because what the females display to the males, one is they've got very feathery legs, but they've got very colorful abdomens that they inflate with air, and insects breathe through holes along their abdomen into a kind of a vacuum cleaner pipe system that runs through their bodies. These things, just like us, take air in through their mouths and swell up their abdomens, but they only do it just before they enter the swarm to attract a male. But they're bizarre. They bring the big feathery legs up alongside and they like this. And those guys, as soon as you capture them, they deflate. So it's really hard to get good measurements on these females and how big they are with their pneumatic inflatomate abdomens. But yeah, so you certainly that's a great example of what you're talking about. Is it's difficult. It's difficult that as soon as you capture a mating pair, you want to know what's going on. There's a lot you don't know because they immediately disengage from each other in most insect species. So yeah.
So I have a question about, I guess, examples of cases that break the mold. So for example, let's say a prostitute whenever the prostitution was legal in a society where it was allowed, you'd have a woman who would have vastly disproportionately number of mates. And I mean, I looked up the world record of the most number of people that someone has had sex with. For men, it was about 50, which is still a lot.
Yeah.
But for women, it was like almost 1,000.
Wow, that's
So,
going
and that was
to
like,
be a woman of the evening, obviously. I would think. Yeah.
But that was within like a 24-hour stretch. So that was, but just to show the different capacity.
1,000 within a 24 hours.
Yeah, it's pretty good. 957 or something like that. It was a wild amount. Obviously, the females of our species are able to vastly outcompete in terms of numbers. But that also kind of makes sense because, you can only orgasm as a man so many times before you're spent.
It almost reverses what I was talking about.
I'm just thinking that, yeah.
But it's such an artificial situation because, I kept saying the typical female, the average female, it's always important to say that. On average, females are like this, males are like this. But that is so out in the extremes, isn't it? In terms of a woman who is mating frequently to break a record or whatever. That is so unusual, but it does bring out the extremes along with, and that interesting flips the equation apparently because males eventually cannot get an erection, obviously. Although in the case of these males, obviously it's a whole bunch of different males. But I see what you're saying. Of course, it's a male trying to do the same thing, right? Of course, trying to mate frequently. Yeah. Do you know what the record per day is for a male to actually orgasms per day? Did you run?
I think it was. Well, in this case with a woman, and I think it was something like there had to be a certain amount of ejaculate per, and I think they measured that in a condom or something. I mean, this is an article I read, but it was around 50 which seems
Wow.
Herculean to me.
Yeah.
That's an amazing amount.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name of the U.S. president. What is it? Oh, God.
The Coolidge effect.
Coolidge effect. Thank you. Yes. That seems to fit in here well. I love
Do you
this
want to tell that story?
Well, yeah, apparently Calvin Coolidge and his wife go to a chicken farm, and she's being shown the chickens, and she sees rooster mating with the hen, and and how many times a day can he mate? Well, 50 or whatever it is. She said, "Tell my husband that." And they go over to him and say, a bit embarrassed, but your wife would like you to know this information. And his reaction was, well, how many females does he mate with? Because it makes a difference. We know that. And they call it the Coolidge effect in agriculture. You chuck the ram in with half a dozen sheep, he might mate with, I don't know, a certain percentage, maybe all of them. But give him another couple. Give him the same ewe, and you won't get this. He will not mate with her more than a few times. But you keep supplying him with ewes, and the Coolidge effect in full blast there.
Is there anything else that we should touch on? Anything
I can't think of anything. I think we've covered a lot of bases here. Take care, Tyler.
See you, Joe.
Bye.